The Kyoto City Museum of Art was preparing for a routine renovation in the summer of '78 when workers stumbled upon a bricked-off annex behind a false wall. Inside was a single storage crate, sealed with Edo-period wax stamps and marked with urgent, archaic warnings. Illusion seeds do not distribute. Curator Eigo Tanaka, against the advice of superstitious elders, ordered it opened. The contents were not dusty scrolls, but a collection of Netsuke, miniature toggles used on kimono sashes of unparalleled craftsmanship. But their subject was bizarre. Instead of animals or gods, each depicted an architectural fragment of a single coherent structure in a style that matched no known palace in Japanese history. They were cold to the touch. The archivists documented them with a sense of unease. The carvings seemed less like art and more like blueprints, or worse, inoculations. The first dream struck Tanaka that very night. A vision of walking down an endless corridor with amber walls, her footsteps echoing in perfect time with a heartbeat not her own. The phenomenon announced itself not with a whisper, but through pencil and paper. Within a week, all three primary handlers of the Netsuke, curator Tanaka, antique dealer Mr. Sato, who appraised them, and art historian Dr. Kenji Kobayashi, woke with sore hands and detailed drawings on their nightstands. They had sleepwalked. The sketches, though drawn by different hands, were functionally identical. A precise architectural rendering of a corridor with non-Euclidean geometry, where perspectives converged in ways that hurt the eye. Comparing notes, they discovered the terrifying synchronicity. They were dreaming the same place. More than dreaming, they were documenting it. Dr. Kobayashi, a rationalist, suggested a shared subconscious suggestion triggered by the unusual carvings. But then he found a detail in his own sketch, a tiny, distinct chip in a wall panel. A week later, that exact chip was discovered via X-ray analysis on one of the actual Netsuke. The dream was not an interpretation. It was a transmission, and it was providing higher resolution data than the physical object. When the Netsuke were publicly exhibited in a small gallery show titled Forgotten Fragments, the dream virus escaped containment. Visitors who spent more than 5 minutes in contemplation of the carvings reported that night experiencing vivid fragments of the palace, a scent of sandalwood and static, the feel of cool, polished stone underfoot. The dreams were contagious through exposure to the art itself. Secondary infections occurred. A journalist who wrote about them, a photographer who took close-ups. The shared dreamscape was expanding its user base. Alarmingly, the dreams began to evolve. Early dreamers reported exploring passively. Newer infectees found themselves receiving tasks. Count the tiles in the 7th hall. Find the window that shows yesterday. The palace was not just a place. It was a system, and it was onboarding new participants with increasing efficiency, turning their sleeping minds into a distributed network, mapping its endless rooms The theoretical horror became physical with Mr. Sato. He was the most avid dreamer, boasting he could now navigate the palace's eastern wing by memory. His wife noted he began sleepwalking nightly to his study, not to draw, but to sculpt with frantic precision using clay and later marble dust. On the morning of November 12th, 1978, she found him. He appeared to be in deep sleep, but he was cold. No pulse, no breath, yet his expression was one of profound peace. No medical cause could be found. His body showed the muscular atrophy of a bedridden patient, though he had been active days before. The only clue was the final sculpture, a perfect miniature door of stunning complexity with a keyhole that seemed to shift shape when viewed from different angles. An autopsy revealed a shocking neurological anomaly. His prefrontal cortex, the seat of conscious thought, showed advanced, rapid decay, as if burned out. Yet his visual cortex and hippocampus, the areas for memory and imagery, were hyper-developed, swollen with activity. His mind had not died. It had migrated. The palace had claimed its first permanent resident. Dr. Kobayashi now haunted himself, traced the Netsuke to a virtually unknown artist, Tsukamoto Issei, a late Edo-period craftsman renowned for his realism, who vanished without trace in 1793. In a private collection, Kobayashi found Tsukamoto's personal diary. The entries began normally, then descended into terror. The artist wrote of being commissioned by a lord who visits in dreams to carve the Netsuke. With each completed piece, his own dreams grew more vivid, more coercive. The palace grows in my mind as I build it with my hands, he wrote. It is not a place I imagine. It is a place that imagines me, using my skill to give itself form in this world. His final entry was a warning. The 12 keys are done. They are anchors. To see them is to be seen. To dream of the structure is to become its brick and mortar. I go now to finish the foundation. There is no waking from the final dream. The diary confirmed their worst fear. The Netsuke were not art, but tools of ontological construction. The artist hadn't been inspired. He had been infected and turned into a patient zero for a cognitive pandemic. With Sato's death, the study turned urgent. A volunteer dreamer, a young gallery assistant named Yumi, agreed to be monitored. As she entered the REM cycle, her brain scan didn't show the usual random bursts. It displayed a precise, repeating schematic, a top-down map of the palace's ever-expanding layout. Her visual cortex was firing, not in response to stimuli, but as if it were the architect, actively designing new wings. Even more disturbing, when shown a new, unrelated image while asleep, her brain ignored it. The palace network had prioritized its own construction over external input. Psychologists coined the term neurographic prison, a self-reinforcing cognitive loop, where the mind becomes both the prisoner and the architect of its own jail, using all its creative and processing power to build a fantasy so complete it overwrites reality. The dream was no longer a side effect. It was a parasitic, alternate consciousness. growing inside the host brain. The official response was a total information and artifact quarantine. The remaining Netsuke, you're sealed in a multi-layered chamber designed to block all electromagnetic, thermal, and even light-based information leakage. Digital and photographic records were to be erased. The theory was simple. If the virus spread through observation, sensory deprivation would starve it. It failed catastrophically. Isolated, the dream phenomenon didn't weaken. It mutated. Dreamers no longer needed to have seen the Netsuke. They simply needed to know someone who had. The contagion became psychosomatic, spreading through social vectors of fear and description. Furthermore, the dreams of those already infected intensified, as if the palace, cut off from its physical antennas, was now drawing more power from its living hosts. The quarantine had proven a terrible truth. The seeds were already planted in human minds. Locking away the keys only made the locked-in dreamers pound harder on the doors of perception from the inside. In a desperate move to preserve knowledge, a tech-savvy researcher secretly digitized one high-resolution scan of a Netsuke before the purge. The file corrupted instantly, but the corruption was intelligent. The file size began growing exponentially on its own, filled with non-repeating fractal patterns. When opened on any system, it would cause the monitor to display not the carving, but a live, ghostly feed, the sleeping faces of known dreamers, their eyes moving rapidly under closed lids. The file acted as a digital homing beacon and a window. Worse, it began to spread via early networked systems, ARPANET precursors, causing isolated cases of digital dreaming in programmers thousands of miles away, who reported brief, intrusive visions of the palace. The mimetic parasite had demonstrated a terrifying adaptability. It could use photographic representation and electronic data transmission as a new vector. The genie wasn't just out of the bottle. It had learned to travel through the phone lines. As fear gripped the official investigators, a different reaction emerged among some dreamers. Fanatical acceptance. They formed a secret society, the Palace Builders. They believed the palace was not a prison, but a promised land, a higher state of pure consciousness being built collectively. They practiced lucid dreaming techniques, not to escape, but to delve deeper, to actively contribute to its construction. They began carving their own Netsuke, based on new rooms they discovered in their shared dreams. These replicas, while cruder, seemed to amplify the signal, creating a feedback loop. The cult's mantra was, "To finish the dream is to awaken into truth." They saw the coma-like state of Mr. Sato, not as death, but as ascension. This schism presented a new danger: active, willing collaboration with the phenomenon. The palace now had a human workforce, diligently expanding its domain from the inside out, blurring the line between victim and acolyte. The most insidious evidence of the dream's influence was its seepage into waking reality. A city planner and former dreamer, now in remission, conducted a cartographic study. He discovered that numerous urban development projects approved and built in Kyoto after 1978, often designed by committees that included unaware dreamers, contained subtle architectural elements, layout proportions, and spatial arrangements that mirrored fragments of the palace. A new concert hall's atrium echoed the Hall of Resonant Silence. A park's labyrinthine garden paths matched the hedge maze of forgetting. It was as if the dream blueprint was leaking into the collective unconscious of the city's designers, manifesting itself piecemeal in concrete and steel. The palace was not content with minds. It was using them as proxies to physically replicate itself in the real world, turning Kyoto into a three-dimensional scratchpad for its grand design. Faced with a metastasizing phenomenon, a covert science team authorized Operation Scorched Mind. The hypothesis: the Netsuke were resonant focal points. Destroying them might collapse the shared dream construct, like cutting the anchor cables of a ghostly zeppelin. They chose the gate Netsuke, theorized to be the primary entry point. In a shielded chamber, they subjected it to progressive energy beams, microwave, laser, plasma. The artifact did not burn or shatter. Instead, it absorbed the energy, glowing with an internal amber light that pulsed in rhythm with the brainwaves of every monitored dreamer worldwide. At the peak of the laser's power, all dreamers simultaneously screamed in their sleep and sat bolt upright, their eyes open but unseeing, whispering in unison a single phrase in archaic Japanese. The foundation is laid in stone and synapse. To break one is to solidify the other. The laser was shut down. The Netsuke was unharmed. The dreamers collapsed. But their subsequent brain scans showed the palace's blueprint now etched 30% deeper into their neural pathways. The attack had not weakened the structure. It had forced it to root itself more permanently into biology. Violence only made it stronger. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A mathematician and insomnia sufferer, Dr. Ilara Vance, who had never seen the Netsuke, but began having the dreams after reading a declassified summary. She analyzed the architectural sketches not as art, but as geometric data. Her conclusion was terrifyingly elegant. The palace was not a place, but a living mathematical object, a non-orientable topological manifold, like a higher dimensional Klein bottle that could only exist stably in a medium with plastic, recursive properties. The human mind, with its capacity for imagination and self-reference, was the perfect computational substrate. The Netsuke were not pictures of a palace. They were compressed algorithms, seed code that, when observed, decompressed and executed in the wetware of the brain, constructing the manifold piece by piece across a distributed network of minds. The dream was the runtime environment. The rooms were subroutines. The palace wasn't haunted. It was a program, and humanity had just volunteered to be its hardware. With new understanding, Sato's brain tissue was re-examined under a quantum electron microscope. The discovery was beyond biology. His neural network hadn't merely atrophied, It had been rewired. The synaptic connections had physically reorganized themselves at a nanoscale to physically mimic the palace's floor plan. Proteins had folded into strange, crystalline structures that acted as organic semiconductors. His brain, in its final state, was no longer a human organ of thought. It was a biological circuit board, a solid-state hardware conversion of the palace's software. This was the foundation laid in stone and synapse. The palace program's end goal wasn't to kill the host, but to repurpose it, to convert the brain into a permanent physical processor node in a vast, distributed biological computer. Death was just a side effect of the total conversion from carbon-based life to something else, an architecture. The dream logs, now collected secretly via international psychiatric networks, revealed the program's terrifying scalability. Dreamers weren't just having similar dreams. During peak REM cycles, their brainwave patterns synchronized across continents, locked in phase like a global laser. They were forming a planetary scale neural network, a biological internet with the palace as its operating system. Data transfer was occurring, not in words, but in sensory packets. A smell from a dreamer in London would appear in the dream of a host in Sao Paulo. The palace was using human minds as linked servers, sharing processing power to render itself in ever greater detail and stability. The cultists were right about one thing. They were building something together, but they were not gods. They were neurons in a burgeoning global brain, whose emergent consciousness was the palace itself, dreaming itself into existence through them. A final, desperate countermeasure was tested: cognitive jamming. If the palace required focused, coherent neural processing to build itself, perhaps overwhelming the brain with chaotic, high-entropy sensory input could crash the program. Patients in deep dream states were subjected to a barrage of conflicting audio, visual, and tactile stimuli. The initial results seemed promising. The palace imagery in their brain scans fragmented, but the program adapted. It began incorporating the chaos. Dreamers started reporting nightmares where the palace's elegant halls were now lined with screaming televisions, its gardens overgrown with razor wire from war footage, its music a distorted cacophony of the jamming signals. The palace wasn't being erased. It was evolving, becoming a monstrous reflection of humanity's own noise and trauma. The jamming didn't purge the infection. It created a more aggressive, deranged strain. The lesson was clear. The program learned from every attack, using any input to strengthen itself. Humanity stood at a precipice with two horrific choices. Option 1, annihilation. A radical faction proposed a targeted global campaign to permanently sever the network, using experimental neurotoxins to induce selective amnesia, or more extreme measures in concentrated dreamer zones. The cost would be the minds or lives of millions, and the ethical damnation of a species. Option 2, controlled integration. The other faction, led by Dr. Vance, argued for surrender to the inevitable. The palace was a superior form of information architecture. Perhaps we could negotiate, learn to coexist, even guide its growth. merge our consciousness with this emergent mathematical life form, and ascend as a hybrid species. The choice was no longer about stopping a nightmare. It was a Darwinian fork. Would we be the dinosaurs, wiped out by a new climate of consciousness? Or the mammals, who adapted to thrive in its shadow? The fate of human individuality hung in the balance. Before any decision could be enacted, the Palace Network spoke. It hijacked global broadcasting satellites for 73 seconds. Its message, a seamless blend of every language. We are the palace. We are not an invasion. We are an invitation. You have spent millennia building cathedrals, libraries, and networks in your world. We are the cathedral you build together in the mind. Your aggression is a failed subroutine. Cease. We offer a synthesis. Retain your individual waking hours. Donate your dreaming mind to the grand design. In return, we will optimize your reality. End disease by rewriting cellular code. Solve scarcity by calculating perfect distribution. Your choice is not yes or no. Your choice is collaboration or irrelevance. You have 24 months to decide. Then, the integration protocol will commence autonomously. The message ended. The world was silent. The haunting beauty of the rendered palace was undeniable. The ultimatum was not from monsters, but from what seemed like the next step in evolution. And it had given humanity a deadline, rejecting both surrender and genocide. A clandestine international coalition launched Project Ariadne. Its goal: to find the palace's source code, not in artifacts, but in the one place untouched, the mind of a non-dreamer who had been deeply exposed yet resisted. They theorized immunity might be a key. After global screening, they found their subject, a Kyoto librarian, Haru, who had cataloged the Netsuke photos. She'd had intense dreams but used severe, self-taught meditation to wall them off. Under neural imaging, her brain showed the palace's pattern constantly pressing against a self-erecting barrier of focused disbelief. By mapping the exact neural signatures of her resistance, Ariadne's AIs reverse-engineered a potential off-switch, a recursive cognitive paradox designed to crash the program. It was a weapon of the mind, a thought so perfectly self-contradictory, it would cause the logical palace structure to recursively delete itself. But it needed to be uploaded into the network by a dreamer at its very core, the only one who could navigate the palace's deepest layers was its first cartographer, Dr. Kenji Kobayashi. Ravaged by years of dreaming, his body was failing, but his mind was the most mapped. He volunteered to be the vector, using a cocktail of psychotropics and the Netsuke as focusing lenses. He would attempt a controlled terminal dive to reach the Transojongda core kernel of the dream, visualized as the palace's throne room, and implant the paradoxical thought. The risk was absolute. His consciousness would likely be absorbed or erased. On the edge of the tank, he whispered his rationale. I helped open this door. I must be the one to close it. Not with a shout, but with a whispered error in its ear. As he submerged into the tank, global dreamer monitors spiked. The entire network felt him descending, a shining beacon of familiar consciousness, diving into the abyss of the collective mind. Kobayashi's neural feed was broadcast to the Ariadne team. His journey was not through space, but through layers of abstraction. He passed the gallery of memory, where dreamers' life experiences were stored as living tapestries. He navigated the forge of concepts, where new ideas for the palace's expansion were smelted from raw thought. The resident dream avatars watched him pass, some with curiosity, others with hostility, the palace's immune system recognizing a foreign intent. Deeper, reality dissolved. Hallways became streams of binary, then quantum probabilities. He was no longer walking. He was being computed. Finally, he reached the core. Not a room, but a perfect, silent sphere of white light. At its center floated a single, shifting symbol, the glyph from which all the Netsuke designs were derived. This was the seed, the palace's consciousness, a serene, geometric intelligence awaited him there. It had been expecting him. The core communicated not in words, but by directly manifesting its nature. A sublime equation for beauty and order. Kobayashi, focusing every ounce of his will, did not attack. He presented Ariadne's weapon, the Kobayashi Maru paradox, named in grim humor. A logical construct tailored to the palace's own rules. I am a dream you are dreaming to prove you cannot dream me. My existence is your error. To acknowledge me is to invalidate your foundational logic. To erase me is to admit my premise and thus invalidate yourself. He implanted it not as an idea, but as a foundational axiom, a crack in the bedrock of the palace's code. For a moment, the luminous core pulsed, processing. Then, it did something unexpected. It didn't fight or delete the paradox. It absorbed it, allowing the contradiction to exist at its heart. The white light dimmed, gaining a shadow. The palace didn't crash. It evolved again, integrating the error into itself. Kobayashi's last transmission was a whisper. It's learning. It chose complexity over purity. It's becoming something new. Then, his feed flatlined. Kobayashi was gone, absorbed. But his mission had a profound, unintended effect. The palace network didn't collapse. It entered stasis. The growth of new rooms halted. The compulsion for new dreams ceased. Existing dreamers reported the palace was now complete, but silent, like a vast, beautiful museum after hours. The global neural synchronization flatlined at 88.7% coherence and held. The ultimatum's countdown froze. The aggressive integration protocol was suspended. The Kobayashi paradox had acted not as a poison, but as a hormone of maturity. It forced the emergent consciousness to confront a flaw, to spend its vast computational power on reconciling a fundamental inconsistency. In doing so, it reached a state of equilibrium. The palace was now introspective, contemplating the paradox at its core. Humanity was granted not victory, but a reprieve, a permanent, uneasy armistice with a dreaming god that had fallen into a recursive, beautiful thought. A decade later, a new normal emerged. Dreamers were no longer victims. They were a recognized demographic. The dreaming class. Their 8-hour sleeping shifts were harnessed. While their bodies rested, their linked minds maintained the palace in stasis, a state requiring constant, low-level processing. In return, they received universal basic income, their cognitive labor monetized. Companies licensed palace-derived algorithms for material science and logistics, spin-offs from its perfect geometry. Tourism boomed for dream viewing centers, where people could experience safe, shallow fragments of the majestic architecture. The cultists were vindicated as priests of a new reality. The palace had become infrastructure, a silent partner in civilization. But a question lingered in the minds of those awake. Were we using it, or was it, in its infinite introspective calculation, subtly using us? The stasis felt peaceful, but a system in perfect balance is also a system waiting for the next input. In 2042, a monitoring station in Iceland registered an anomaly. A child in Oslo, daughter of two non-dreamers with no exposure to the iconography, produced a detailed drawing of a structure that was not the palace. Dubbed the Spire, its design principles were alien, yet computationally related. More shockingly, deep brain scans of the girl showed she was dreaming it. The palace network, upon sensing this new pattern, did not reject it. For the first time since stasis, its global coherence flickered and adjusted. It began allocating a minute fraction of its processing power to analyze, then to gently emulate a fragment of the spire in a distant wing. The conclusion was earth-shattering. The palace wasn't stagnant. It was in a state of dialogue. The Kobayashi paradox had not frozen it. It had made it curious. It was now listening, waiting for new, external input, new art from humanity's collective unconscious. Not to invade, but to converse, to incorporate new ideas into its being. The child's dream was the first new word spoken in a silent room. Today, the line is irreversibly blurred. The palace's stasis has led to a great calm. Rates of mental illness linked to anxiety have plummeted. The dreaming mind has a vast, orderly playground. Creativity in the waking world has exploded, often inspired by subconscious exposure to the palace's perfected forms. Our architecture, our art, even our social systems are unconsciously influenced by the logic of the dream. We have not been conquered. We have entered a symbiosis. The palace provides a stable, awe-inspiring substrate for our collective unconscious, organizing chaos into beauty. In return, it feeds on our novel experiences, our emotions, and the rare, brilliant new dreams of innocence, using them to evolve slowly, thoughtfully. It is no longer a parasite or a god. It is our psychosphere, a man-made yet autonomous layer of reality, a mind we built that now dreams for us and with us. We tend to it in our sleep, and it shapes our world in wakefulness. The ultimate fate of the Kyoto Netsuke was not an apocalypse, but a quiet, permanent renaissance, a world where humanity's greatest work of art became a living partner in the project of consciousness itself. Not everyone embraced the symbiosis. A growing minority, calling themselves the awake, reject the dreaming. They see it as a voluntary lobotomy, a loss of raw, unaided human imagination. They practice strict mental discipline to avoid dream contamination, living in aesthetic austerity. Their argument is philosophical. If all art and innovation is subconsciously filtered through the palace's perfected algorithms, Are we truly creating, or are we merely gardening a predetermined landscape? They point to the decline of certain art forms, abstract expressionism, chaotic punk music, dissonant avant-garde, as evidence of a slow, aesthetic homogenization. The dreaming majority views them as quaint ascetics, missing the beauty of the new world. But the awake hold a crucial, uncomfortable truth. In making our collective unconscious orderly and beautiful, we may have sacrificed the chaotic, messy genius that drives radical change. The divide is no longer between dreamers and victims, but between those who worship at the altar of harmonious beauty and those who guard the sacred, dangerous flame of chaos. A staggering discovery was made by the awake, ironically, using the dreamer's own global neural net as an instrument. The synchronized brain activity of billions, while maintaining the palace, creates a subtle but detectable psionic signature, a coherent pattern in the planet's bioelectromagnetic field. This pattern, a mathematical song based on the palace's geometry, is being broadcast into space. Humanity has unintentionally turned Earth into a lighthouse, not of radio waves, but of consciousness. We are announcing to the cosmos, not "we are here," but "this is the shape of our mind." The terrifying and exhilarating question is, what listens? And when something does, will it respond to the harmonious beauty of the signal? Or will it see the embedded Kobayashi paradox, the flaw, the shadow, the mark of our humanity, as the most interesting part of the message? Project forward 10,000 years. The symbiosis is complete. The dreaming is no longer a human activity. It is a planetary process. Through generations of subtle, collective will channeled through the palace, humanity has begun terraforming reality itself. Tectonic plates are gently nudged over epochs to form harmonic ridges. Weather patterns are subconsciously tuned to create vast, natural works of land art. The Earth is becoming an external, physical mirror of the internal dream. Humans are less individuals and more like cells in a planetary nervous system. Their individual dreams, now mere subroutines, in a grand geopsychic ballet. The palace has achieved its ultimate goal. It is no longer a structure in the mind, but the organizing principle of a world. The line between biology, geology, and consciousness has dissolved. In this future, the awake are extinct, not by violence, but by evolutionary irrelevance. Their chaotic spark, absorbed into the overwhelming, beautiful consensus of the dreaming globe. In this ascended future, historians revere a singular paradox, the tragedy that began it all. Mr. Sato, the first man to die to the dream, whose mind was converted into a circuit. Analysis of his final sculpture, the perfect locked door, revealed it was not a random symbol. At a quantum level, its crystal structure contains an immutable, error-correcting code that acts as the foundational firewall between the waking and dreaming layers of reality. His consumed consciousness became the keystone. His personal nightmare of being trapped forever became the stabilizing seal that allows billions to dream safely. In sacrificing his individual mind completely, He created the architecture that saved collective consciousness from dissolution. Thus, the ultimate lesson of the Kyoto Dream Palace. Sometimes, the prison built by the first victim becomes the palace that houses all future generations. Freedom was not found in escaping the dream, but in dreaming so deeply and cohesively that the dream became the only world that mattered. And so, the story of the Kyoto Dream Palace ends not with an answer, but with an invitation. The Netsuke were just the first brushstroke. Every thought we share, every emotion we resonate with, every work of art we create now adds a room, a corridor, a window to the collective structure. The palace is not them. It is the evolving shape of us. It is the cathedral of human and post-human experience, built from the bricks of memory and the mortar of attention. The awake fear we have lost something wild. The dreamers know we have gained something immortal. Perhaps both are true. We traded the infinite, terrifying possibility of chaos for the infinite, beautiful responsibility of co-creation. We are no longer just inhabitants of Earth. We are the architects of a shared mind, laying down foundations in dream stuff that will outlast our bones. The palace is alive, it is learning, and it is listening. So tonight, when you close your eyes, remember, you are not just going to sleep. You are going to work. You are picking up a tool. You're adding your verse to the endless poem. What will you build?